Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Nancy Drew. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we find out that those coins end up being, I wonder, is it just the coins themselves that naturally attract spirits? Obviously they end up finding out that like the moon being like a full moon and everything is making it even stronger, or is it because of the circumstances around the coins that people died for, so those coins are cursed, or were they already cursed? That's kind of what I'm wondering. They never really dive into that. Probably not the biggest plot point anyway. I'm just curious. So the whole plan is to have a seance, because initially they want to turn the coins over to an FBI agent, friend of Owen's, so that they could be used as kind of like, hey, look at what the Hudsons have been up to, what they did, and at least kind of point the finger somewhat in their direction with that whole situation. But obviously, Nancy's so fixated on solving Lucy's murder, because for her it's like, hey, we solved Lucy's murder, we solved Tiffany's, because they are connected. But more so than anything, sadly, Tiffany's murder went to the wayside the moment Lucy's became a much more top priority for her. And I'm wondering, why is that? Because I guess for her it's a more injustice, because it's like Tiffany's murder is a fairly new murder, whereas Lucy's has been decades, well, borderlining on decades. So obviously for them it's a thing of like, for her it's like her murder might kind of take a little more precedence. I mean, obviously she is being haunted by Lucy specifically, so but regardless of all of that, the seance is a very complicated situation, because obviously Victoria doesn't want to have anything to do with it, because not only are just regular dead being attracted to the coins, even things inhuman. Now, what that necessarily means, we don't know. We do see that there's these creatures at one point in time that attack Nancy and Nick. It's like, okay, so those are definitely something else. They're kind of like these dark creatures. I guess it's kind of like, almost, if you want to think about it, I guess like the darkness manifests itself as these, I guess you can almost think of them as demons, where it's like, oh, these are maybe like evil spirits, and then there's demons, kind of something that might be older and just something that just exists in that plane of existence of the supernatural, whatever the case may be. I think that's kind of, fascinating. And obviously Victoria doesn't want to kind of do the seance, even at multiple occasions. They're trying to keep, for once, she even like drops herself off at the police station trying to get arrested for drunk and disorderly, just because the station is one of the few places in the entire town that's not haunted. I was almost wondering if it was like something the building was made out of kept ghosts out or something like that, but it seems like that's not necessarily the case. It's just, it was this one place that wasn't as haunted, at least what she said. They try to keep her sober the entire episode, but then she starts drinking. I thought a neat little element that came out of this episode was the fact is that George gained an appreciation for her mom, because for her it's just kind of like, she always probably thought her mom was a little wacky. Obviously that changed when she herself got possessed, and the fact is her mom basically played a big role, in fact, in getting her unpossessed. So I think that, plus kind of witnessing what they saw, and even Bess kind of pointing out, I was like, wow, I mean, that was terrifying what we saw. I can't imagine where your mom has to be the only one who sees all that, like, all the time. And then it kind of makes George kind of realize, like, why her mom is kind of the mess that she is. And the fact is that she's functioning at all, having to deal with that on a regular basis, is kind of a miracle in itself. So I thought that was kind of a nice, tie-in, and I think that in itself can, get George to kind of understand her mom a little bit more, and kind of, see like, oh, what she's going through. She got a peek into that world. So I think going forward, she's going to be, a little more understanding of just the complicatedness that, it's her mom, Another element to this I thought was kind of fascinating is, and this kind of goes back to why I think the whole Lucy Stable situation is interesting when it comes to Nancy putting forth more effort in that investigation than any other. Maybe it's just because she feels a little bit of a kinship, but also it's like every time something comes up related from Lucy to her family, she kind of doesn't pull the trigger on the investigation, because Nick kind of brings up something that's like, yo, like your dad got like a one-time payment from the Hudsons. It's like, but he worked for them all the time back then. Yeah, but it's like they would normally put the money through billable hours and stuff like this. This was something super off the books. But and anytime Nick would kind of bring it up, she didn't want to talk about it, which is so interesting considering the fact is any other lead, Nancy would have jumped at the opportunity. She jumps at every opportunity, but this one, no, because it hit a little too close to home. She's fine with like suspecting the people around her, her friends, the people she works with, even the guys she has feelings for. It gets, you know, to be fair, like Lucy, I mean, I'm about to call her Lucy, Nancy has a very complicated relationship with her family, so it's like even with that, it's like there's no way they do anything like that because I mean, and to be fair, it's like that with anyone. Family, because they're the people you love, are always going to be your blind spot, you know. And the fact is, Ryan literally told her last episode, "Hey, your dad was kind of the fixer for my families," but Nancy didn't jump on that, and that's that also leads into a complicated thing with, you know, Nick. It's like, hey, you didn't tell me anything. I kept giving you multiple opportunities to open up to me. And I think it's hard to say what that comes from. Is that simply from losing her mom recently? I mean, the way George made it sound like Nancy's always been like this, but my thing was always thinking like it's most likely because it's because of losing her mom made it worse. Like it might have been there, like she's always been kind of like, oh, I'm gonna handle things on my own. That's just the type of person she is, which, hey, I can kind of get that. That's not the easiest thing to fix, but I think it also stems from the fact that if losing her mom kind of made, like those walls might have been mid, like waist side height, but now it's like they're like 15 feet tall now just because of everything with her mom. So she has a hard time, I think, opening up to people. Like I said, whether that has been a thing the entire time or whether it is just simply losing her mom that kind of facilitated that, we ultimately have to wait and see. But it is kind of that thing, and we saw it kind of in the last episode too, of like the whole thing of like once Nancy's kind of fixated on something, like other people kind of almost get in the way. It's just kind of like, let me do my thing. I'm trying to figure this whole thing out. Because even she, during the seance, ended up bringing up, hey, did what my dad find in the attic have something to do with the murder? And it's like, yeah, it did. But Nancy couldn't bring herself to ask the question she was burning to ask. And she never got the opportunity to ask, did my dad have something to do with your murder? Did my dad kill you? Because she couldn't bring herself, because she didn't want to even fathom it. Hence, like with the entire episode, like anytime Nick's like, hey, you can tell me anything, you know that, right? She's like, yeah. And she just wouldn't talk about it. She wouldn't talk about what she's found already because it would have meant like admitting like there's a possibility, and she didn't even want to admit a possibility. And I thought that was kind of a neat element because even she brings it up at the end of the episode of like how for her, she always felt like the town always had a very like denial type of thing when it came to the whole Lucy situation, because it was just kind of like, because no one wants to admit that like the person who killed Lucy was most likely one of them. Like that was just that's why it's like easier, I guess, to leave it as an urban legend and gotta make it this whole thing, which I'll get to that in a second. But you know, she even herself had admitted it's at the end, it's like all she's been doing is kind of denying this all episode, not really taking this opportunity, like, you know, because it is her dad. You don't want to admit when the person you love, someone you love, is capable of potentially doing something like that. So there's that. But kind of circling back around to it, the interesting thing is we end up finding out that Josh, the guy that Nick works for, is actually Lucy's half brother, and that's how they got the pendant they needed to kind of something of Lucy's to do the seance and everything. So there's that side of things. Then there's this whole, you know, Laura making a whole stunt and making it so like, oh, look at McGinnis, he's not really looking after Tiffany's murder. Like the fact of the matter is, like, you know, saying that the police department, basically smearing the police department, but more specifically McGinnis's name, saying that Tiffany's murder was a murder. Obviously that kind of pushes some backlash from McGinnis onto Ace, because it's like, oh, you should have given me the heads up about this, Ace. And even Ace kind of bringing it up to Laura's attention, like, why would you do that? Like, you know, you can like talk to me about stuff like that. She's like, well, I'm impulsive and stuff like that. And then, you know, it's like he had talked about the fact that it's like, yeah, you know, it's like, I looked into it. Like, you want to claim that you and Tiffany are so close. You sued her. She was like, the fact of the matter is she had the right to my inheritance. And the fact is I wanted the money earlier than me being 25. So I sued her. Come on. It's like, that's what sisters do. That's what rich sisters do. And immediately in my mind, that kind of said it'd be like, so that's what this is all about, isn't it? Because even before they explain it, it's like, don't forget, Ryan was trying to push for Tiffany's thing not to be a murder, because a murder investigation would stall him getting the money. It was the whole point. So for him, it's a whole thing of like, if he says it's not a murder, at least he'll get the, because he was basically cut off from his family. I mean, well, we know that he definitely got cut off later on, but like I said, it might be just the fact that the Hudson family isn't as rich as they want to pretend that they are. They're trying to keep up appearances that maybe the business or whatever, isn't as good or as lucrative. Like, maybe that's kind of what they're trying to keep up front, and maybe getting Tiffany's money would help alleviate that. Or maybe it was Ryan's way to kind of distance himself from ever needing his family because he'll have Tiffany's money. But whatever the case may be, Laura pointing all this toward the Hudsons, making them murder suspects and everything, means that the money will go to her. Because another thing you also have to consider too is, it's kind of interesting, Laura didn't show up immediately after Tiffany's death. Like, it just seemed like she came out of the woodwork the moment, like, her timing was interesting. Like, I feel, but, because it turns out the night that Tiffany died, apparently she was only 10 miles away. So that should have been a quick jump over, but it took her a while to kind of pop up after Tiffany's death. So that's why I'm kind of like, it's just kind of like, you're probably like, wait, this is my opportunity. So it kind of brings in question your entire thing of like, my sister was murdered. It kind of sullies your intentions. Maybe you did love your sister, or maybe you're trying, probably didn't. Like, it's the thing of, you love your sister, but you probably weren't on the best of terms before she died. And maybe there's a little bit of regret in her eyes because of that. Maybe Laura feels, me and my sister weren't on the tightest of, we weren't the tightest around the time she died. So, maybe there's something there, but it sullies your motivations of like, oh, like, you're trying to look out for your sister's murder and stuff like that because you love her, you care so much about her. It makes it seem like, no, and actually points to you having motives, which I don't think she had anything to do with it. But that's the problem. It got Ace thinking, because he had brought that up to Carson. It's like, whoa. So Carson had pointed out, it's like, your girlfriend would be the one to get all the money if the Hudsons went down for this murder. If it is. So, and he brings this to Bess's attention, and Bess, was kind of like, no, there's no way she would actually do it. I guess because they spend enough time around Laura. But to be fair, it's like, you don't really know her. She even said it herself. She's impulsive. She wanted her money. She felt like she was owed. And you can almost see it. It almost seems like Tandy's kind of got this spoiled girl thing going on. Like, like, at the very least, she seems entitled, and she felt like she was entitled to that money. But your sister kept that money out of your hands because she knows how impulsive it is. You'll blow that money up. You'll just spend it on weird and crazy stuff, So I'm sure that was kind of a motive behind all of that as well. There's also the interesting element at the end of the episode, kind of shifting gears a little bit. It's the whole situation with George's little sister, which I heard, like, I like the little relationship bits we get between George and her sister, because it's like, okay, you brought your toy so that we could use as a seance, kind of a yes and no. And then, like, she was like, okay, so I can get a couple things. He's like, you could get one thing, 5 things. And Nancy goes, 5 things. And George going like, thanks a lot. Now she's spoiled. I don't know. I think it's super adorable. But the sad thing is, we see that something has possessed that toy, and it's not Lucy Sable. It's some other spirit. Who knows if it's going to be one of those. Oh, part of me wonders. My brain immediately goes, do you think it could be Nancy's mom? Well, because there's a lot of spirits that reacted to those coins and stuff like that when they were drawing all those spirits in with Lucy's necklace. Who's to say that it wasn't? It could be one of those malevolent things, but part of me wonders, what if it's Nancy's mom? Because she's always wanted to communicate with her mom, right? This would be an opportunity for that. That's where my mind is right now, but it might not be the case. But we'll ultimately have to wait and see. Then there's also this interesting aspect where McGinnis is actually reaching out to Nancy. It's like, yeah, state police are taking over Tiffany's murder investigation, which means turning over all the evidence, including Nancy's break into the morgue and everything. But I thought was fascinating was he was like, basically like, all right, neither one of us is the bad guy in this situation. The fact of the matter is, I got to go through some red tape, but you have resources and you're able to kind of find stuff that no one else could be able to find. So McGinnis is actually suggesting that they work together, and I'm like, that's interesting. After the smear campaign you've kind of led against her, you expect her, but to be fair, this isn't just for his sake, this is also for her own sake, because she's going to be one of the suspects, because not just her, literally everyone else, because they've never been officially cleared either, just because of everything. So if another department, gets involved in all of this, then there's going to be at the top of the suspect list. So that turns into a whole thing in itself. So obviously, it's in her best interest to kind of work with him. Plus, she'll basically kind of have his resources. Maybe it might not be that quid pro quo, but, ultimately we'll have to wait and see. But McGinnis getting to her and saying like, oh, knowing that it's poison made Nancy kind of piece it all together. The way, Ace kind of disappears, gets a little nervous when he gets certain phone calls. The fact is that he was the only one that wasn't brought in. It's like, you're working with McGinnis, which Ace admits it. He's like, yeah, the fact is I was hacking into something. I'm curious what it was he was looking for, because he ends up bringing it up and he's like, it's not really worth getting into, but I'm sure it's going to be kind of a big thing for him to kind of go, because for whatever it was, it's something that went down a year ago. Once again, we still don't know how his dad plays into this, so it might be a thing of like, because once again, McGinnis had said like, hey, your dad, it's a reason why I gave you this deal of like, hey, you keep an eye out for me, and you won't go down for this, because hacking is a federal crime, so he'd be doing some serious jail time. So, but for him, it's like, it was a little stuff here and there, so it was no big deal. It's just like, hey, keep an eye out, keep your ears low with anything that goes down in town. But obviously that got more complicated because of Tiffany's murder, and obviously, and Ace feels bad because Nancy doesn't want to trust him anymore. But at the same time, it's like, he's like, I'm gonna make it up to you, because he tries to tell her about Laura, but she didn't want to listen at that time, which is so interesting, just because it's like, there's this whole complicated thing with her, like, how can I trust you when you kind of kept stuff from me? But at the same time, like, everyone's kind of got their issues and their secrets. Obviously, Bess has hers. To be fair, you were at that point with literally everyone, with George, with Nick. So it's a very complicated thing to kind of just be so. I just think it's a little mean not to really kind of listen to him. But I guess Nancy's trust is a very complicated thing to earn, especially because I think in her worldview, a lot of people are suspects, and it's just like, once you betray that trust, it's kind of a little hard to get it back, I think, and maybe, there's an even deeper underlining issue with that, but, so I think because of kind of that detective mind of kind of looking at everyone kind of like a suspect, maybe that kind of trickles over, obviously, into other aspects of her life because of just that mentality, so. Then you have the whole situation with Ace taking a trip with Laura, and he's making a recording because he's like, hey, I'm going to let you know whatever it is that I find, hitting up Nancy about that whole situation. So I thought it was, I was like, oh, he's trying to earn back her trust and everything, because also he does kind of suspect Laura. Obviously, Nick ends up coming across the truck later on. Police are gathered around because there was an accident and things don't look good. It could be a thing of like Laura and him were going back and forth because he was questioning her, because he was like, yeah, it's going to be a long ride, so it's going to give us time to talk. So he probably started asking her questions about the whole thing. So the whole thing probably then becomes like, okay, so was this on purpose? Was this an accident? Well, because the complicated thing is like, oh yeah, the last person to work on her car was Nick, so that's probably not going to look good. That's probably going to turn into something. Like, he might become a suspect because of that. It's like, oh, you're involved in this. You tried to kill Tiffany, even though he didn't. And now you're trying to kill her sister, even though he didn't, But I think that might be the lane things might kind of go, but we'll ultimately see. And speaking of Nick, sadly, him and Nancy end up breaking up. It's just that complicated thing of, like I had brought up earlier, the whole walls situation, that like she puts up these walls and it's like, you won't tell me anything, you won't open up about anything, which she's like, I'm trying, which even it's like, yeah, I know it, but for him it's like, it's too much, which even part of me wonders, like, there's not going to be a crazy thing where it ends up being like Nick and George, because like, I guess because of the time they spent together last episode, it seemed like Nick and George have actually kind of gotten close. She's like, oh, do you want this and this? And he's like, yeah. And it's like, oh, she knows exactly what trait to get him and everything. I'm like, I think not unless they're setting that up to be something, maybe not. It might just be the fact is that George became a good friend during all of this, like where him and Nancy's relationship's a little bit on the rocks. Like George was there as a friend, so maybe that's a potential angle that they're going down. Not unless they do decide to kind of make it something else, but ultimately we'll see what ends up happening in that regard. So that's kind of sad because Nancy's got that on her mind, plus the thing at the end where she finds out, wait, my dad's been basically cloned my phone, so any messages I get, he gets as well. So she does know that her dude who was examining all the evidence, examining Tiffany and the whole Lucy crown thing, was like, hey, found some other like hair strand up there, but it couldn't have been Ryan's mom because she wasn't around at the time, which is interesting because we also find out that it wasn't Ryan that paid Carson to get Nancy out. It was actually Ryan's mom who actually paid the money, so that was interesting. But obviously she has a good alibi, so she couldn't have been the one who killed Lucy. But to be fair, it could be she has the money and resources to hire a hitman to do it. So, but obviously there's the whole thing of, the fact is he copied your, cloned your phone like that. Plus the evidence went missing, and looking at where he's been, it's like he was there. So he stole the evidence, but why? But now it's kind of making her piece it all together. And like I said last episode, she immediately jumped to it being Ryan's mom's hair, but my mind immediately went to the other lady's hair is most likely your mom's. Now, and she even straight up, she's like, you have to ask the question you don't want to ask. And she asked him, did you kill Lucy? Which immediately in my mind is, no, they did not kill Lucy. They helped cover it up, though. Both your mom and your dad. I wonder why did she get involved? Because I guess maybe for her, like, Carson was too over his head, and it was like, no, we'll get through this together. I'm not going to let you take the fall for this, because whatever thing that they're trying to cover up, I don't want you to go down. So she decided, like, I'm going to, because I figured as much. And I think that's going to be the interesting step. It's already a complicated thing because it's like, oh, your dad. But it's going to get even more complicated when it turns out her mom was involved. Like, that's going to shatter her because, her mom is gone now, and she had her view of, like, who her mom was. And my mom was this great person, but to think, like, my mom potentially had a darker side. Like, it's all coming full circle from, like, obviously that chest she saw them bury or uncover, dig up when she was little. So that's a whole thing. So, and obviously I skipped over it a little bit. We did get some answers from Lucy that the fact of the matter is the same person who killed her isn't the same person who killed Tiffany, even though the cases are connected. So there's that. And also it's like, did the Hudsons kill you? No. Yes, no, yes. So it's a thing of like, they kind of did, they kind of didn't. So it might have been a thing of no one killed Lucy. It might have, no, because we know she was stabbed with a knife. So it could be a thing of like, they indirectly did. I guess it's kind of the whole point of like, they had nothing to do with her murder per se. They more so covered it up and got Carson and them to cover it up. But it might have been a thing of where it was not intentional murder. It might have been an accident. Once again, the whole cover up makes it more than, so. But like I said, it's kind of hard to accidentally murder someone with a knife. I mean, to be fair, not unless you did it to kind of threaten them. Not like it was because like you would have to kind of go there with the intent of using it and stuff like that. I don't know. It's hard to say who's really the suspects in this case because I feel like the Hudsons, I don't think it was them. Laura, maybe. Not unless we end up finding out the Marvins are involved in that, so obviously because there's a little bit of something there because obviously, Sebastian and Ryan's mom were a thing. So, and obviously Tiffany found that out, but who knows in the long run. It's also sad too because the last thing Tiffany had said, not Tiffany, but Lucy had said to her brother was, don't believe anything they say about me, because obviously even back then, like there were rumors floating around that calling her a slut and stuff like that. Even the lady she was running up against for Miss Horse Joubert was whispering her in her ear, basically calling her a slut because like, oh, there's all this stuff about her and blah, 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 which is like, that's sad. That's gotta be tough because remember Karen talked about it was already hard that like hearing about her best friend being like this like folklore whispered by kids of like some ghost story, and obviously it's gotta suck for Josh too because it's like your sister kind of gets paraded around like that as like some ghost story that people laugh and joke about and stuff like so that's kind of tough. So like just a lot of interesting things went down in this episode, and ultimately I'm curious to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next one. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.